Hello viewers, welcome to True Crime Diaries. This is your Chris Barker. Cameron Todd Willingham, 23, has fallen asleep while caring for his three young daughters, 2-year-old Amber Louise Kuykendall and 1-year-old twins Carmen Diane Willingham and Cameron Marie Willingham. He's exhausted, so he's put them in their room, each in their own crib, while he takes a nap. Cameron's wife, Stacy, is out thrift shopping for Christmas gifts. Cameron is startled awake by the sounds of his children crying and one of his daughters screaming, "Daddy! Daddy!" The entire house is filled with thick smoke. Cameron claims he rushes to his daughter's room but is overcome by the thick smoke. He is unable to contact any of his children, so he flees the house to seek assistance. When he steps outside, he is greeted by a neighbor who has already called 911 to report the fire. The fire trucks arrive and immediately get to work. While the others battled the flames, Cameron was talking to one of the men about what had happened. Cameron runs to see Amber when one of the firemen emerges from the house, and then tries to run back into the house for the other two girls. Two of the men on the scene were forced to hold him back and prevent him from entering the burning house. One of them even claimed to have gotten a black eye while attempting to restrain him. The house was completely engulfed in flames. There was nothing they could do to save the 1-year-old twins and 2-year-old Amber, who were discovered in the master bedroom and died of smoke inhalation on the way to the hospital. The fire killed all three children, Amber, Carmen, and Cameron. Stacy, their mother, was still out Christmas shopping at a thrift store when she received the call. Cameron was fortunate enough to escape with only minor injuries, a few minor burns on his shoulder. Stacy was clearly devastated, but people immediately began to question Cameron's reaction to their death. The family wasn't particularly wealthy. Stacy worked in her brother's bar, some other place, and Cameron was normally an auto mechanic but was out of work at the time. Because this is a small community where everyone knows everyone else's business, the local bar organizes a fundraiser for the family to help pay for the three funerals. Cameron and Stacy both show up to the fundraiser, and it appears that Cameron is having a little too much fun and drinking a little too much. According to those who attended the fundraiser, he was behaving strangely for someone who had just lost their babies in a fire. One attendee even reported hearing him say something to the effect that he doesn't have anything to worry about now because the money will start pouring in as people feel sorry for him. Meanwhile, the fire department was on the scene investigating the cause of the fire. Because there was no evidence that the fire was caused by faulty wiring, that possibility was ruled out, along with the other possibilities of an accidental fire. They walked through the house, taking notes on everything they saw. One of the fire investigators noticed pictures of skulls and what he later described as an image of the Grim Reaper on the wall in the utility room. When they looked into the children's rooms, they discovered what they thought were signs of an accelerant being poured on their floor. When they examined the burn pattern, they noticed that the accelerant was poured in the shape of a pentagram. The smoking gun, however, was discovered when they discovered an unusual burn pattern on the aluminium threshold plate, which is that small metal piece that connects the doorways. Some sort of liquid appeared to have leaked through the crack, and when tested, it came back as a positive sample for charcoal lighter fluid. Some of the broken windows contained a spider web-like pattern, what fire investigators call crazed glass. This pattern indicates that a fire burned quickly and hotly, implying that it was fueled by a liquid accelerant, causing the glass to fracture. During the investigation, the fire department discovered 20 signs that the fire was started intentionally. They suspected that liquid accelerant had been poured throughout the children's room, including under their beds. They then poured more down the corridor and out the front door, forming a fire barrier that would prevent anyone from escaping. Everything appeared to be absolutely intentional and police were looking straight at Cameron as their suspect for setting the fire. What is the motivation? They suspected him of starting the fire and killing the children in order to cover up the girls' abuse. Cameron and his wife Stacy had a violent history. Neighbors reported hearing them fight all the time, and it was widely known in the community that he had been physically abusive to his wife. While Stacy admitted that he had abused her, she claimed that he had never abused the children. Cameron, according to her, adored and spoiled them rotten. But things were leaking that didn't bode well for her husband. The police were speaking with the neighbors about what they had seen, and some believed that on the day of the fire, Cameron had never tried to go back in for the girls, and he didn't even appear emotional as the house burned down. Some of them said he appeared to be putting on a show. Of course, there were others, such as a few of the firefighters on the scene, who contradicted those statements. According to one of the men who had to restrain him and keep him away from the house, he even got a black eye that day. It was time to grill Cameron on his account of what happened on the day of the fire. Stacy left the house around 9 a.m. to go to the Salvation Army to get a Christmas present for the kids. Soon after, the twins started crying, so he gave them both a bottle and let them fall asleep on the floor of their room. They had a baby gate across the room's doorway so they couldn't get out. Amber was still sleeping in her bed, so Cameron decided to sleep in the master bedroom as well. Cameron awoke a short time later to the sound of Amber screaming, "Daddy, Daddy." When he awoke, the house was already filled with smoke. He jumped out of bed, put on pants, and yelled for Amber to try to flee the house. Then he made his way down the corridor to the twins' room. There was thick black smoke in their room, and he could hear things popping and crackling in the fire. He attempted to stand, but the smoke knocked him down. He couldn't see anything, so he felt his way around the room looking for the babies until he couldn't take the smoke any longer and fled the house. When he got outside, he yelled for a neighbor to call the fire department, and he claimed he tried to get back into the house to find the girls but couldn't because of the fire and smoke. When the investigators asked Cameron how he thought the fire started, he said he didn't know, but because the fire was the most intense in the twins' room, he thought it started there. He mentioned that their room had a space heater, but he wasn't sure if it was turned on at the time of the fire. Aside from that, he had no idea what had started it, but the popping and crackling he had heard indicated it had to be an electrical problem. Cameron's story and the injuries he received that day, according to the investigators, did not match the evidence. Cameron, for example, claimed he ran out of the house without first putting on his shoes. But he didn't have any burns on his feet. They believed that if he had spent that much time in the house trying to save the girls, a fire like that, which left burn marks all over the floor, would have definitely burned his feet. Detectives were convinced he had set the fire on purpose. They pointed to abuse allegations and evidence of arson, including accelerant marks in the shape of a pentagram on the twins' bedroom floor. They even pointed to the skull posters in his room, implying that this was some sort of satanic ritual. They emphasized his injuries and subsequent behavior. Cameron, on the other hand, refused to budge on his story, displaying little emotion until they showed him photos of his deceased children. Then he crumbled. He couldn't stop sobbing. However, the police interpreted this as evidence of his guilt rather than innocence. Even without Cameron's confession, police believed they had enough evidence to charge him with the murder of his 3 daughters. Bail was set at $1 million, which he, of course, lacked. The state attorney decided to try to offer him a plea bargain in which he would plead guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. This would result in a quick and speedy trial, saving the family from having to go through all of the evidence in a lengthy court proceeding. Cameron's lawyer urged him to accept it, but he refused. He kept his innocence and never faltered. He was prepared to present his case to a jury. Cameron was assigned 2 lawyers by the state because he couldn't afford to hire his own. While Cameron remained in custody, both the defense and prosecution began to prepare their cases for trial. Then there was a pleasant surprise for the prosecution. They learned that a prisoner named Johnny Webb, who was serving time alongside Cameron Todd Willingham, was interested in making a deal. He claimed Cameron confessed to him that he set the fire on purpose. He took lighter fluid, began squirting it around the walls and floor in the shape of a pentagram, and set fire to it. Webb, who had a lengthy criminal record, had recently been imprisoned for robbing a woman at knife point. He was a drug addict who would do anything to feed his addiction. Despite this, the prosecution was willing to accept his statement as fact. They appeared to have a strong case. While many people appeared to be ready to burn Cameron at the stake, Stacy stood by her husband, saying she believed he was innocent and would never harm the girls. The trial began in August 1992. The prosecution presented expert witness testimony regarding the 20 indicators of arson discovered at the scene by the fire department. To seal the deal, they had Johnny Webb testify that Cameron Todd Willingham confessed to him about setting the fire on purpose. The defense was woefully unprepared. They apparently tried to find a fire expert to counter what the prosecution was saying about the arson, but they couldn't find anyone. In the end, the jury heard from only one witness, the Willingham's babysitter, who said she couldn't believe Cameron could have killed his children. The trial lasted only 2 days, and the jury was only out for an hour on the third day before returning with a unanimous guilty verdict. Cameron Todd Willingham received the death penalty for the murder of his 3 daughters. Stacy, his wife, had initially advocated for his release. She wrote to Texas's governor, saying, "When it comes to our children, I know him in ways that no one else does. As a result, I believe there is no way he could have committed this crime." Her support, however, dwindled as she came to terms with his death sentence. And, as one of the few people who thought Cameron was innocent, it appeared that she, too, began to believe in the guilty verdict. She stopped visiting after a year and filed for divorce. Cameron began receiving letters from a woman named Elizabeth Gilbert while he sat on death row, with only his parents coming to visit him now. Elizabeth had agreed to be a pen pal for a death row inmate as part of a campaign organized by a group opposed to the death penalty. She started writing Cameron, which was completely out of her comfort zone. She went in knowing only that he was on death row, so he had to have done something truly horrific. Whatever she imagined was nothing compared to what he was found guilty of, the murder of his children by fire. Even though she suspected he was guilty, she committed to treating him with humanity. They corresponded via letters, and Elizabeth paid him visits on occasion. Normally, they would talk about random topics, never about the children's deaths, but Cameron gradually opened up to her and maintained his innocence. While Elizabeth did not initially believe him, she became interested in learning more about his case. So she drove down to the courthouse one day and asked to review the trial records. She was curious about what had happened. And it was the information contained in those records that convinced her that Cameron Todd Willingham was not guilty. There were far too many contradictions. Some witness statements claimed that Cameron did not attempt to save the children and sat motionless, whereas other statements, particularly from the firemen, claimed that they had to restrain him from running into the house. Then there was the statement from the fellow inmate, which couldn't be trusted, especially since Cameron was sitting there sternly claiming he didn't do it. Elizabeth insisted on finding out more. She contacted Cameron's now ex-wife, Stacy, to find out what she thought. Stacy stated, as she had always stated, that her husband had been abusive to her, which is why she decided to move on and marry someone else who would treat her better. She also stated that she did not believe Cameron set the fire on purpose in order to harm the children. Elizabeth also requested a meeting with Johnny Webb, the prison informant. He stuck to his story, saying Cameron told him he set the house on fire on purpose. However, just a few months after the jail visit, Johnny Webb sent Elizabeth a motion to recant testimony, in which he declared that Mr. Willingham is innocent of all charges. Webb was now retracting his earlier remark about Cameron. However, Webb quickly recanted his recantation without explanation. Nonetheless, the evidence of arson was the most important piece of evidence in the conviction. Moreover, Cameron was unable to find anyone to testify against the arson theory during his trial. Elizabeth began looking for experts who might be willing to take a second look, but everything came to a halt when she was involved in a serious car accident and was hospitalized. She was unable to continue investigating the story and assisting Cameron in obtaining a new trial. Everything just came to a halt. She had been one of the only people on his side, and now she couldn't help because she needed to look after her own health. Then, a few weeks before the execution, Cameron's legal team decided to send the reports from the fire scene to a man named Dr. Gerald Hurst. He had a PhD in fire science from Cambridge University. His field of fire science was relatively new at the time. Previously, it was the fire department's responsibility to investigate fires and reach conclusions. This is fascinating because firefighters are not scientists. They are mostly trained to put out fires and not to study how fires start and spread. Dr. Hurst reviewed the file, the photos, the videos, and the testimony, and it became clear to him that this was not an arson case at all. This fire, on the other hand, had flashover, which is the instant ignition of all combustible material in a room. According to him, the patterns on the floor of the girl's bedroom were not caused by a liquid accelerant poured on the floor, but rather by the natural pattern left behind by a flashover. And what about the alleged pentagram pattern? When you look at where the windows were in the room, you'll notice that the flash pattern just followed where the windows were. Windows provide ventilation to a fire, which is exactly what Dr. Hurst suspected had occurred here. The fire report also stated that they tested a liquid accelerant found near the porch door at the scene. There was apparently a barbecue on the porch, which would have contained charcoal lighter fluid, so that could also be explained. Dr. Hurst summarized his findings, stating that this was not arson at all. That the original investigators didn't bother to rule out accidental causes, so the entire thing should have been thrown out. On February 13, 2004, only 4 days before Cameron's scheduled execution, this new report was summarized. As time ran out, Cameron's legal team rushed to file last-minute appeals. Cameron paid a visit to his ex-wife while waiting to hear if his case would be retried. She had paid one last visit to him in prison, and this time she had completely changed her mind about what had happened. She had previously stated that she was certain her husband did not start the fire. She was now certain Cameron was guilty. And when he asked to be buried next to his daughters after he was executed, she refused. It's unclear why she changed her mind, but she began talking to the media about how she had read all of the reports and now believed her ex-husband had deliberately killed the girls in the fire. She even went so far as to file a document with the court stating that Cameron confessed during that final meeting at the prison. Cameron denied saying anything like that, but it was enough for the courts to deny his request for a new trial, or to postpone the trial for a little longer while they thoroughly reviewed the new fire reports, which completely contradicted the first. Cameron Todd Willingham was executed on February 17, but not before declaring his innocence one last time. When he looked behind the glass to see who was watching his execution, he noticed Stacy among the spectators. This, according to some, was the final nail in the coffin. They saw it as proof that this man was a psychopath capable of murdering his 3 children. Others felt she had sealed the deal with her testimony and was the reason he was eventually executed. But none of that matters now. What matters is all of the new evidence that has emerged since then. The Texas Forensic Science Commission investigated the fire again in 2008. They reviewed the fire reports, testimony, and photographs once more and concluded that there was no evidence of arson. And Johnny Webb, the jailhouse informant who said Cameron confessed to him in prison that he had set the fire on purpose, has recanted his statement numerous times, claiming that the only reason he came forward with that testimony was because the prosecution asked him to and he was hoping for a lesser sentence on his robbery charges. And it worked because, after receiving his statement, they accelerated his parole, obtained clemency for him, and transferred him from a state prison to his hometown jail so he could be closer to his family. What about Stacy's claim? Cameron confessed to her during their most recent meeting. Stacy told the Chicago Tribune in 2004 that he never confessed, and she told the New Yorker in 2009. So, did the state execute an innocent man? Maybe. In any case, this is an example of why the death penalty does not work in all situations, especially in a flawed judicial system. Cameron Todd Willingham was far from perfect, and he admitted to being physically abusive to his wife, but did he deliberately set fire to his 3 daughters? What do you think about the Cameron Todd's case? I really appreciate your feedback. Thanks for watching.